Hi everybody, it's Karen from Divorce Workshop, back for another Insights in Divorce. Today we have Reverend Geneece Goertzen coming on. She's going to talk all about recognizing relationship flags. So let me get her on. There. Workbook is available on Amazon worldwide. Reverend Geneece is going to talk to us about recognizing relationship flags. I'm thinking probably red flags and maybe yellow, and some of the green flags, and some of the things that some of us in our own lives may have ignored when we were in a relationship. So just waiting to have Reverend Geneece on. Reverend Geneece is getting her PhD. She's an author. She's a speaker. She's a domestic violence advocate. She's got her master's in divinity and social work. She's got a lot of great resources for us. It's okay, we'll keep trying to invite her on. Geneece, you can also request to join in the live as well. So we're going to probably talk a little bit about domestic violence, which is prevalent, as we all know. I have these stats. I'm sure Geneece will have more recent stats, but 30% of women experience domestic violence. It's a widespread issue. And I look forward to her talking to us about talking more to us about it. Still having a hard time getting on, Geneece? Can I invite you on there? Good morning.
Okay, am I live now?
You're good.
Okay, I apologize. I was trying to join from my computer and that just was not working for me, so I will use my phone.
Yeah, I've had other people on too, and they've tried to use their computer, and it just doesn't work as well for some reason.
So
But
I
anyway,
apologize.
no problem. But thanks for coming on. And I did do all your while you were trying to get on, all your PhD advocate, all that. But first of all, I want you to introduce yourself to everybody, and thank you for coming on.
Sure. I think most important to this conversation is the fact that I'm a survivor of more than 2 decades of domestic violence. So the other things that you mentioned about me, the advocate, I'm a licensed master social worker. I have my Master of Divinity. I'm a PhD student, as you mentioned. But all of that stems from the fact that I am a survivor. I don't know that I would be in those advocacy spaces or pursuing the graduate education had I not been a survivor first. I think that gave me the fuel to want to use my story to help other people.
Yeah, makes perfect sense, right? Because who knows better than survivors, right? And
Absolutely.
the passion is always shown through, right?
Yes. So when I meet other advocates in the space who are also survivors, it's the same thing. I think the pain that we've experienced creates that passion to try to create a better world.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit. I know we're going to meet more times than today, but let's talk about a bit about domestic violence in general. I mean, I have stats here, but you're going to probably have better research than I do. But from what I'm seeing and hearing, it's still extremely common. Nothing's really changing much. I don't know if you want to talk about, and a lot of people think, there's still that naivety that it's just hitting, right? And it's more than that. So if you want to kind of give us a good talk about that or explain a bit more.
Yeah, I think I heard you said about 30%, and
Hmm.
that's pretty widespread number that's accepted. There are pockets within the United States here that are higher than a 30%. I live in Texas, and it's about a 1 in 3, but could be a little higher in several of the states. It's actually about half of the women are experiencing domestic
Hmm.
violence relationships across their lifetime. And what is alarming is that this is true across gender, it's across class, it's across
Hmm.
race, it's across education levels.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily see huge spikes in who is affected by domestic violence in any of those
Hmm.
areas.
Hmm.
It affects everyone.
I had I met somebody who lived in Ecuador, and she told me it was in the 60s, 60%.
Mm,
Um, the domestic violent rate there, and so as you're saying, it's different in different areas, right? Like depending.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, the where we see some of the higher pockets here in the United States are like on the indigenous
Yeah, same here in Canada.
spaces,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And that just tells me that there's a lack of education, there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of responding appropriately. Maybe there's
Hmm.
not enough advocates in the space. And I think a lot of the work we do is reactionary, right?
Hmm.
Our work exists as advocates because domestic violence already exists, but we
Hmm.
also need that, what they call that upstream conversation about prevention. How can we prevent this from happening in the first place?
Hmm. It's a very big question,
Right.
right? So you're an author. I mean, so you wrote, and I have two daughters that are 19 and 21, and this recognizing flags, and I wanted to say red flags, right?
Mhm.
But it's, because I'm going to tell you from my own experience, I didn't recognize them.
I didn't either.
So, right? And um, I'm a real advocate for that because I was very naive about it. So this conversation today is recognizing the flags, right? So I mean, I have my own that and it was interesting because I think I was reading something in the book that most of us don't realize it till after,
Yeah.
right? And like you just said, you didn't, and neither did I. And so the reason why your book is so important is that I don't want this for my daughters, right?
Right.
So if you want to talk about, like, we can talk about the flags. I think you break it down to red, yellow, and green.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to start talking about some of the reds.
Sure. Let me back up just a second
Hmm.
and tell just a little bit more about my own story.
Hmm.
So I have been in two domestic violence marriages.
Hmm.
The first one lasted 2 years, the second one lasted 22 years, and there was about 18 months between them. And the reason I think I fell into that second one is that it looked different than the first. The first the physical abuse was, um, it ramped up a lot more quickly and it was a lot more present.
Hmm.
And this was back in the early 90s. I knew that physical abuse was a problem,
Hmm.
right? But no one ever told me about verbal abuse, emotional abuse, some of these other forms of abuse that I was experiencing but didn't recognize.
Hmm.
So when we see people say, "Oh, I have a difficult marriage, we can't communicate, he gets angry," we're talking about other forms of abuse that exist outside of that physical assault.
Hmm.
And so it was so much harder for me to recognize domestic violence without education about what those other forms of abuse looked like. And I think that is a lot of what goes into this book. And here's just like the top of it here, and talking about the different forms of abuse at the back. We
Hmm.
In the back it talked about the types and tactics of abuse. And when we know that emotional abuse and verbal abuse and financial abuse, and now in our modern society, digital abuse or
Yeah,
electronic abuse are happening, it's a lot easier to see, but it's no wonder we were naive and didn't recognize the forms when there was no one to teach us.
exactly.
It's not that we really ignored the red flags, it's that we didn't know what they were to begin with. And I think that's what I'm hoping to do with this book is educate people on, first of all, the blatant red flags, the things people tend to
Hmm.
recognize more quickly, but also to talk about those yellow flags that are less known and less discussed. Let's think about the things, like stalking. For some people, that's a blatant red flag. For other people, it's more of a yellow flag. And when we think about our media, like movies, rom-coms, I mean, what do they say? If someone's stalking you, it's because he loves you.
Hmm.
He's obsessed with you. It's a form of love. It's a form of endearment, right? And
Hmm.
stalking doesn't end in pretty stories. Stalking generally ends in very tragic
Yeah.
and traumatic stories. So to talk about some of these things and to give a better view of how that will end, maybe it's cute when he shows up at work with a dozen red roses the first time. But a year later, when he's telling you, oh, I don't like that coworker, you need to not speak to that
Hmm.
person, I don't want you to go here without me, it becomes a method and a tactic of coercion, right? Of isolation. And we need to talk about these things with our kids because
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but I didn't hear about it in school. I didn't hear about it in church. I
Mm-mm.
didn't hear about it in the home.
No, I didn't hear anything. And I was just thinking there were so many times when I was dating this ex-husband that he was actually mean, but took it off as a joke. And
Right.
right, and I laughed too. And then I was like, years later, I'm like, nothing of this was funny. Like it was just cruel, right? So they're subtle, right? And that's the hard
Yeah.
thing, you know. When I went into the interesting, when I went to the lawyer, the first thing he asked is, well, has he been physically hitting you?
Hmm.
And I said, no, but then I start listing. And he's like that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And, and I went, well, okay. Like first of all, I was naive about the legal system, which is another talking, but it's like, I thought, well, he's doing all this, that matters. And in the court of law, it didn't seem to matter. In Canada, anyways, I'm not sure it's much better in the
It's
States,
not.
but yeah. So there's a lot of subtle things and because women in general, and I want to say also that men also could be victims of this as well.
Absolutely.
But I just want to put that out there. But in general, I'm a people pleaser.
Hmm.
So, and I was brought up, could be our generation, as being very kind and don't talk, just sit there pretty, like. So for me we just kind of um, tolerate that, right? Like I didn't know any better, like you said. So it's interesting that, and I think that's why you and I and these other people we have such an advocacy of trying to at least understand for these young women or women that still are in it, because there's still a lot in it, that not just the red but these yellows can really
Right.
add up, right? It can really add up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we dismiss these yellow flags because of humor, like you stated, or
Hmm.
because we've been brought up, we've been socialized to be kind and forgiving, to look the other way, to try harder ourselves.
Hmm.
How many victims of abuse have been told to try harder in their
Hmm.
relationships and that
Hmm.
that would solve things. It doesn't solve anything when only one person in the relationship is trying.
Yeah. And what's the average? It takes 7 times to get out.
Yeah.
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 And that's tragic because that means there's a lot of years
Yeah.
existing in that space of unknown, right? Will it
Yeah.
get better? Will it get worse? Am I trying hard enough? And if you're in a faith-based space, am I, loving, forgiving, praying?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that next week, because that's another component, right? That adds on to an already challenging situation is because you have to think about that aspect as well.
Yeah.
Does God not love me enough, or am I not doing enough for, you know what I mean? So it's such a complicated, hard thing to deal with. So we talked about the red, which are the blonde, like everybody knows, the black eyes, and the yellow, the subtleness. I mean, I had a list here, like the meanness, the subtle criticism, that disguised jealousy that you think is romantic,
Right.
playing the victim, um, boundaries not being testing and stuff like that. But on a positive note, you have some green flags, right? So what are some like green flags that these young women and women should look for when they're trying to find a good mate for them?
I think probably my top green flag, and it's not listed first in the book, maybe it should have been, but is respect,
Mm.
right? Respect for you and respect for others.
Mm-hmm.
When you see someone who is making fun of the disadvantaged, taking advantage of the wait staff at a restaurant, making fun of someone who is maybe differently abled, that's not
Mm-hmm.
respect for another
Mm-hmm.
person. And eventually that gets turned back on you and they disrespect you as well. And it's not funny, right? They do try to
Mm-hmm.
disguise a lot of this in humor, and it's not funny and it's not okay. So I think respect is one of the biggest green flags that you can look for, because the lack of respect is definitely a red flag. Equality,
Mm.
is there equality in the relationship?
Right.
Do Is there like a gender bias, on the other side, where one gender is favored over the other? Is there a double standard that, it's good for one person, but it's not okay for the other? Um, Having a sense of security in the relationship. Do
Mm-hmm.
you fear the person's going to disappear on you? Do you fear what the person might do to you? Or do you feel safe in this relationship? I think
Yeah.
that's a really big one. And we have to ask ourselves that honestly. Because how often early in a relationship can you say, I feel safe, this feels good?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you have that gut feeling, that intuition? And I really value intuition now, because I ignored it
Mm-hmm.
for so long. But do you have that intuition that maybe something's not quite right? And then do you have the courage to pursue looking into what doesn't feel right about the relationship? Um, Someone who's fair, someone who's honest, someone who's confident about themselves, confident about you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do they build you up, or
Yeah.
do they tear down your accomplishments and achievements? Do they make fun of that thing you want to do because you have a dream, right? That's not a green flag if they're making fun of you in any way, shape, or form. Do you have freedom in the
Mm-hmm.
relationship? Freedom's a huge green flag.
Mm-hmm.
Does the person trust you enough to be yourself, to have lunch with friends,
Mm-hmm.
to pursue your dream of education, to pursue um, your goals at work? Uh, that freedom is a really big thing that aligns with trust and equality and safety. Those are big deals. Compassion.
Yeah.
Is the person compassionate? And that kind of goes
Empathy.
with
Mm-hmm.
that same respect, right?
Yeah. Do they have empathy?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we know, in looking at, say, narcissism, which is high in a lot of cases of domestic violence, they don't have a sense of empathy.
Oh,
And I think we want to dig deeper if we think they have empathy, because empathy can kind of be faked
yeah.
or shadowed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we want to know about that true sense of desire for the well-being of another
Mm-hmm.
person.
Yeah, because I often say that the empathy that these clinical or subclinical narcissists can have is like they can say, like they can write it a sympathy card, right? Like you have to see how deep they can actually go. And if I look back at my own marriage, it was not very strong empathy, right? So,
Right.
but
Same.
again, we also want to practice a lot of self compassion with ourselves as you get out of that type of situation, because again, as you said, we didn't know any better. There weren't any books like yours out there to, my mom didn't give me a book at 19, 20, said, read this, right? Because she was also in a high conflict divorce with a, my dad was
Mm,
also subclinical, or I don't know, even narcissist, right? So I learned from it. She learned from that. So that's why this book and your advocacy is to break these patterns, right? That's another thing is,
right.
so yeah.
Recognition, and then hoping to build confidence in someone
Hmm.
in order to get out of an unhealthy relationship earlier rather than
Hmm.
later, because we know from having been in this for many
Hmm.
years, decades even, that they don't get better, right?
Hmm.
They tend to get worse over time. And when you introduce children into the mix, I think that complicates things even further.
Yeah, it did for me. It
Mhm.
does for many.
Yeah.
It adds a huge layer, uh, we'll have to talk about this another time. But the grief aspect is there as well,
Yes.
right? Yeah, it's
Yes.
huge.
That's It is. I talk about that a lot, and it's not the focus of my current research, but it is something that I've looked at a couple of times and want to dig into
Mm.
further because there is so much grief and loss in a domestic violence situation.
Yeah, I'm trying to spread that as well because of my Thantology, right? Because I'm like, there's so much more than just material stuff. It's like the grief that I had my children with this person. That's
Right.
heavy. It's something I've been dealing with myself, and you know, and I do the grief work. I'm a grief counselor and stuff, but still, it's like it sits with me still, right? It doesn't just go away. It's a Yeah, but we can talk about grief another time. But
Definitely.
so, do anyone have any questions for Reverend Geneece today? If not, I would like to. Your book is called Never Ever After, or
Never, ever after.
yeah,
And this is
never,
my preview copy, so they don't all have this stripe. It's the first one I grabbed, and I didn't realize it till I sat down. But never,
never
ever
ever after.
after. How recognizing red flags in relationships can save you a whole lot of grief.
Yeah, and I think it would be imperative or important for anyone with nieces, daughters, um, anyone that you have a woman in your life, really, that you think could use this.
Right. I would also advocate for the guys too, though, because I
Mm.
gave this to my boys because I want
Oh,
them,
yes. Hmm.
one, because we know men are victims of domestic
Yep.
violence, but two, I want my guys to be healthy men.
Yes.
Right? So I think like a secondary use of this book is like introspection, like
Hmm.
not just to look at our relationships and make sure our relationships are safe, but also introspection, right? To make sure that we are the healthiest versions of
Hmm. Hmm.
ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, because not all men in my research too, who grow up with domestic violence don't become. They do. Some of them do. I know that, but some of them do not. Right? Like they do get a different pathway. Right? So
Yes.
if they, oh, I got. I love the title. Yeah, it is a very good title.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you're right. Both men, boys, like young teenagers, young men, could also use this book, right? Because it's not about, I know personally men that have been abused in their relationships. So,
Same.
right. So I think yeah, because it's the one little thing we don't talk about much is that there are women that abuse men, right? And so, different ways than the men to the women, but it does happen. So,
Absolutely.
um, yeah.
Absolutely. And we want everyone to be as healthy as
Hmm.
possible. We want relationships to be healthy because when we model healthy relationships for our children and for those around us, we are trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah. So the book is available on Amazon?
It is.
Okay.
It's as a paperback or as a Kindle
Okay.
digital version.
Okay. So options are available. So
Mhm.
yeah, so this is great. This is a great conversation. I know you're coming on next Tuesday at the same time, and
Yes.
we're going to talk about more of the faith issues that come up with domestic violence and more of your story, maybe,
Yeah,
if you're willing.
absolutely. I'm always willing to share. Like I said, I'm
Yeah.
hoping that what I have experienced somehow is kind of like that lighthouse for somebody else so that they don't have to go through it themselves.
I just have a question. Often women, well, there's a statement, often women use their children to abuse the men. He called it alienation. Yeah. They use their kids as their tool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it happens a lot. saw that just recently here locally, where I sat with a friend in court as her abuser took the kids away from her, and it was just a really tragic
Hmm.
story. Um,
Yeah, the coercive control, abuse by proxy, and alienation, whichever term, because I know everyone's using different terms. I think it's happening quite a bit for both male and females. This is real, you know,
I
taking
think
the.
I think what happens is we see more gender-based violence, right?
Mhm,
Men abusing women. And when men have the finances to take
mhm,
the children away from their female victim, it happens quite often. But I think what I see in the court, I'll just say it's an abuser bias, right?
mhm,
Generally, the one with more power, who often has more money, is the one who is able to further denigrate or harm their victim through the court system.
mhm,
And
mhm,
it happens over and over and over again. And it's a really tragic thing to see. Uh,
mhm. I have my older sister had a friend who her ex-husband was very, very wealthy, and um, all three children don't talk to her in for years. Like,
right,
like,
right.
yeah.
The person
So I,
the power and the finances to control the court outcomes
mhm,
tends to be the winner. And they often, I mean, I know abusers who are ending up with their children. And
yeah,
in what world is that okay? And yet our system allows it, and it happens over and over again.
yeah. But yeah, it does happen to both men and women. So, but anyways, all right. Well, we'll wrap it up today. Thank you for joining, and look forward to talking to you next
Yeah,
week. And take care, everybody.
absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you
Bye
so
bye.
much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye.